Good morning, everybody. This is a live emergency update here as we have a tropical cyclone that's forming down in the Bay of Campeche. And we are thinking that this is probably going to be a very formidable tropical cyclone now. I was a little bit skeptical at first, but now just looking at some of the latest GFS model, definitely has a fairly intense hurricane coming into the south central coastline here of Louisiana. And some of these forecast models even have this thing being a major hurricane now, including the GFS model. So this is, I was originally going to be going live to members only, and then when I saw that GFS coming in real time, I was like, you got to be kidding me with this. We have got to go live, and we are tracking this. Right now it looks like a little bit of pea soup down in the western Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane model tracks and the global model tracks take it off to the western edge of an anticyclone over the Gulf of Mexico, and then an upper level trough is going to come into Texas, and it looks like just ahead of that upper level trough there could be quite a bit of ventilation, and some of these forecast models are even showing a Hurricane Francine to be a major hurricane potentially when it comes into southern Louisiana. A lot of the other models, though, show it kind of interacting with a little bit of wind shear, and that would definitely preclude the development of a more intense hurricane. But the latest GFS, the 12Z operational GFS, just came in and definitely shows the ceiling, I think, for Francine. So this is a live emergency update. Live emergency update on the threat of a Hurricane Francine next week approaching the central Gulf Coast. That's Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Please share this stream if you know anybody that lives out there in the central Gulf Coast as well. I know that a lot of people are worried about this, potentially moving up through the central Gulf of Mexico. And a lot of the intensity models are still yet to adjust. I think that the global models are able to pick up on that upper level ventilation a little bit better than the hurricane models at least. And here's what we're dealing with. Here you can see that upper level trough and the steering mechanisms. My pointer is botched on this live, so I'm going to try to use this pointer finger. I hope that you could see this here on the College of DuPage site. This is the European model, and you can see that anticyclone dominating the Gulf of Mexico through the southeast, and you can also see the approaching trough near Texas, coming out of Texas, and notice how that upper level flow near the right entrance region gets a lot more meridional near Wednesday night into Thursday, and that could increase the ventilation for this tropical cyclone aloft. Basically what happens is you get lift in two areas of the jet, the right entrance region and the left exit. And if you can have a compact tropical cyclone that interacts favorably with that right entrance region or left exit, that will ventilate it aloft and aid in the maturation and intensification of that hurricane. And right now we are going to go over to the GFS, and I'm going to show you that. This is the GFS model, 12Z GFS coming in. It has a 957 millibar central pressure on this ripper just off the southern coastline of Louisiana. You can see all this onshore flow coming into the Port Morgan area, just right up into Lafayette as well, a little bit further inland. And I wouldn't be surprised if this even ends up going just a little bit further to the east. And you also need to keep an eye on it in Houston, even though right now the models track this offshore of the Houston area. 12Z GFS is coming in hot with a fairly intense tropical cyclone, and we're going to look at the upper level winds here. Here you can see the approaching trough over eastern Texas. See how these upper level winds are getting a lot more meridional? This is going to allow for this tropical cyclone to interact more favorably with the right entrance region of that jet. And you're probably going to get some ventilation as it lifts off to the northeast. Even though we're in the middle of a record-breakingly quiet hurricane season, it only takes one tropical cyclone to cause problems. And right now, this operational GFS takes a ripper right up into southern Louisiana there, an area that was just racked in 2020, hit very hard. I saw it just yesterday. They imploded that bank tower from Lake Charles that had all those shards of glass raining down on everybody, storm chasers. I think even a storm chaser almost bled out from that event down there in Lake Charles with that glass coming down. Finally imploded that tower, and it was just sad. So sad to see the blue tarps on the roofs there in Lake Charles with such a long road of recovery out there. But even though I'm showing you this GFS, it shows you kind of the ceiling, I think, for this tropical cyclone when it comes in. If it comes in as a major like this, which there is potential given the ventilation of that upper level, with that upper level trough, that this does have the potential. I think the ceiling is potentially even a major hurricane coming into the southern Gulf. Look at this low level jet as well ahead of that upper level trough. Here's the trough coming in, and interestingly, because of the warm North Pacific oscillation, we're still getting the tendency for this trough in the western U.S. and a ridge in the east. You can see the trough just dominating the western U.S., bowling ball of a trough. If we didn't have this hurricane coming into the central Gulf Coast, this would likely be associated with some pretty significant severe weather as well, and the atmosphere is starting to give us clues on how it's going to behave. Look at this thing coming inland. This would bring a tornado threat inland into like northeastern Arkansas, Boot Heel in Missouri, potentially near Memphis as well. There's your tropical cyclone after it makes landfall by Thursday afternoon, and it looks like that's just going to meander northward through the central U.S. Bring it with it tornado potential, rain-making potential as well. Looks like you get another tropical cyclone off of Baja that could happen. But this trough lifts up into Canada, and we also need to watch the uptick of a second season coming in. Look at this around September 18. You have a bowling ball of a trough swinging around the base of the trough. It gets a little fluffy when it ejects. If this were to eject a little bit faster, I think you'd probably be talking about pretty formidable severe weather here. But nevertheless, look at the ramp up of that low-level jet in the Central Plains right around the 19th of September. Western Nebraska, western Kansas. Looks like there could be some serious potential for a second season severe weather that's going to be coming in right around that time. And look at that, the 0 to 3 kilometer energy helicity index. But we are over 10 days out for this. Timing probably going to change quite a bit, but something we need to watch out for because I'm scheduled for a couple of speaking events as well during that weekend. So that's always kind of an issue that you face as a storm chaser, kind of scheduling that out. But let's look at the Gulf of Mexico again here, and then we're going to look at some of the other forecast models, hurricane models, look at the ensembles too. Latest, but right now we are looking at the latest GFS coming in with a high ceiling scenario for Louisiana as it comes in. So look at that as it's lifting off to the north, folks. Organizing to the east of Brownsville, and I think later on today you might even need some tropical cyclone watches to be going up here from Brownsville all along the coastline. But it does look like at least things are very consistent on this northeastward turn up toward Louisiana on Wednesday night. So there you can see that tire, just a big tire of a tropical cyclone. Eventually heading up toward Port Morgan area, south central Louisiana. But you can look at last night's GFS, and it's not quite as intense, of course, as the morning, and it had a lower end tropical cyclone, basically a lower end hurricane, taking a very similar path. But the GFS is definitely aggressive with the evolution of this tropical cyclone. The European model, at least last night's European, not as aggressive. This is last night's European model. The 6Z, I think, actually trended up a little bit more. Yesterday's European model had a slightly stronger tropical cyclone, but more of a tropical storm here near Beaumont, near the Sabine River. That's yesterday morning's European. And last night's European model has a slightly weaker tropical cyclone headed up toward the Sabine River. So the GFS model a lot of times will over-intensify these hurricanes, but you look on over at the NAM model, which you're not supposed to use for a hurricane, and boy does it ramp it up too. But you go from the 6Z, last night's NAM, to 12Z. It took a very formidable tropical cyclone approaching the southern coastline of Louisiana, and then you go to the 12Z NAM, and it fluffs it out just a little bit. So it all depends on this upper level trough that's coming out of Texas. I think how deep it's going to be, the proximity of the right entrance region to this tropical cyclone, and if the tropical cyclone starts to feel some of that ventilation in the upper levels, and I do think that it'll have the potential to be a pretty formidable tropical cyclone. These are the 6Z runs. Headed over to tropical tidbits. EcoFlow.com. Just an incredible website for tracking the tropics out here. And it still has not organized a low-level center just yet, or this convection would be a lot more organized as well. You can see how it's a little bit spotty. Those hot towers are kind of scattered about through the western Gulf of Mexico. As you get that low-level center to organize, the convection will organize around that center as well. When you get convection out here in the tropics, through the condensation process, you release latent heat into the column. That leads to surface pressure falls. Surface pressure falls leads to more low-level convergence, more vigorous convection, and you get more latent heat release, and those are the positive feedbacks that lead to tropical cyclone organization and intensification. So I want to look at some of these forecast models. Let's look at the hurricane models here, in particular the HWRF. This is the 6C run of the HWRF. Still trying to figure out its low-level center, but you can see by late night tonight, it tries to get basically a streamwise vorticity current just pumping into this low pressure. You can start to see a low pressure begin to organize on the HWRF model there over the Bay of Campeche, western Gulf of Mexico. Not sure if my pointer finger is even working on here, but then it really tries to organize this center to the south of Brownsville. The 6Z HWRF takes us very close to the Mexico coastline, and if this is able to drift a little bit inland, then you're definitely not going to have an organized tropical cyclone yet come up that way. This is the 6C HWRF. Doesn't quite go out far enough yet. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, it does. Now you're out on Tuesday night. Look at these multiple centers. You have like supercell storms out here, multiple centers struggling to form. So the HWRF definitely shows this thing struggling to find a center. You even get a couple of these centers trying to organize. This one will probably be the dominant center. But any of these complexes of storms lead to latent heat release, surface pressure falls. But the 6Z HWRF, which goes all the way out to Tuesday night now, looks a lot different than a lot of the global models. Let's go back to Tuesday night on the GFS. This is Tuesday night on the GFS, and it shows like a 979 tire of a tropical cyclone down there. Might as well even be a hurricane. So the HWRF could not be more different than the global models, especially the GFS, in the organization of this tropical cyclone out here. Look at that thing just crank. And I do think that the European model is accurate in the more meridional branch of that jet. And I think you're going to get a little bit more ventilation. Notice how these wind barbs kind of go off to more to a northerly direction, and these wind barbs are a little bit more westerly. That's the ventilation visualized in the upper troposphere a bit, and that's what causes these tropical cyclones to really thrive, especially this one as it gets just a little bit closer to Louisiana. Thank you, Team Dominator members, for making these forecast updates and storm chases possible. Looks like we're going to have to drop down here on Tuesday to chase this, which means I got to get my taxes done today. But I do find it interesting. Let's see what the last night's run of the HWRF showed. Last night's run of the HWRF has a much more organized tropical cyclone there just to the east of Brownsville. So at least from last night into the morning here on the hurricane models, it is having a little bit trouble organizing in the face of that increasing southwesterly wind shear. But last night's HWRF is able to, look at it get sheared. So it looks like the hurricane models are kind of causing that southwesterly wind shear to lead to a more tilted system. You've got your low down here to the south of Houston, your convection displaced a little bit. Anytime you get displacement of that convection from the low-level center, that means that it's starting to respond to some southwesterly wind shear. So what we're going to have here over the next few days is a battle between the models. Is the global models, like the GFS in particular, going to be accurate with that high ceiling forecast, feeling the ventilation of that upper-level trough? Or are the hurricane models going to be accurate, and you're not going to have as organized or compact of a tropical cyclone, and as it feels those that southwesterly wind shear, it's really going to weaken that and it brings basically a low-end tropical storm into the Cameron Parish area, into southern Louisiana. So you never want to just have fear based on that high ceiling forecast, but you also don't want to ignore it either. But definitely a lot of the models are not on board with that vigorous hurricane being depicted by the GFS. But it also is very possible that the global model, the GFS, is able to better identify and better represent the ventilation ahead of that upper level trough, the ageostrophic jet circulation. Let's take a look at some of our other hurricane models here. This is the HMON model, 12Z. This is the new model. It has a 995 central pressure initialized on this. So that is lower than I thought was the central pressure. I wonder if it ingested some new Hurricane Hunter data. My buddy Carson out there, who is a camera operator for Swamp People, said he keeps seeing all the Hurricane Hunter folks out there. Let's go to the 6Z HMON. And it seems to have the weaker pressure at the initialization. And it has this disjointed tropical cyclone lifting up through the Gulf of Mexico. And by Tuesday night, it's still struggling to figure out its center. En route to the Invest, Hurricane Hunter aircraft are on their way. And tropical tidbits, you can track this data as it comes in real time. And there they are in the north central Gulf of Mexico. That's probably the same Hurricane Hunters that Carson was seeing out there on the ground. But they're on their way. It'll be interesting to see. It's very possible that that could be named a tropical depression just based on that data alone. Some of these other ensembles from last night take that hurricane a little bit closer to New Orleans. So you got to watch out. Even New Orleans, even Mississippi, anywhere along the central Gulf Coast needs to keep an eye on this. Only takes one hurricane to cause problems. And then as that comes inland, it's definitely going to have the potential of producing some tornadoes as well. So thank you, everybody, watching this. Thank you for tuning in. We are breaking down the latest here of this tropical cyclone and also the arrival of a potential uptick in the second season coming up here in 10 days. But it is very possible that if you get a stronger tropical cyclone, it can kind of disrupt the whole entire wave train. But I do think a lot of look at this severe weather happening coming up. You're going to have this major low-level jet. You're going to have a tropical cyclone coming through the Memphis area by about September 14, lifting off to the north. And then another trough, at least according to the GFS, is going to be ejecting. Look at that. This brings a vort up into Canada. And then it looks like you've got another kicker coming in on the backside. Boy, they don't really eject. They have this high pressure here with a little upper level low still meandering over the southeastern U.S., but overall a big ridge in the east, closed low. And it seems like these want to eject off to the north toward the upper Midwest. So no reason to be alarmed just yet, but I do have some speaking events coming up in Chicago and New York City on September 20th, including meeting the Dominator up there. And that's kind of a career-long issue that I've always had, is juggling those speaking events with storm chasing and not missing any storm chases. It does pull moisture northward, but you can tell that possibly this temporary uptick here in hurricane potential might even prevent this moisture surge from ramping up this next severe weather potential. Popping over. Oh, hello everybody. Got a few people watching this. I know we got football that's about to start as well. But there it is. Looking at the upper levels. This could be a hurricane. And if you believe the GFS model, it could be an intense hurricane. Maybe even a Cat 2, Cat 3 potential. But I'd say Cat 1 or Cat 2 definitely appears very possible. You can almost see that ventilation down here near Louisiana in the upper level relative humidity field. See how you kind of have this area of moisture. You've got a high pressure center down in the central Gulf of Mexico. And you can definitely see this higher relative humidity content. And a little bit of the dry air coming in. That's the elevated mix layer with that upper level trough coming through Texas Wednesday or so. And that's gonna, with that upper level trough, anytime you get a trough ejection and you get those strong westerlies over the Mexico plateau, they lead to a drying out and an ejection of the elevated mix layer, or EML, across the southern plains. You gotta be kidding me, gotta be kidding me, gotta be kidding me, gotta be kidding me. Yep. Here is total precipitation accumulation through the period, and you can definitely see the several inches of rain. And this is the European model, not even the GFS, but definitely showing you the potential flooding disaster that might happen down there. And I know we've already had several inches of rain down in Louisiana leading up to this. And so any new rain that falls here in Louisiana is going to be falling on saturated soils. So this is with the landfall. You can see that uptick in the several inches of precipitation. Let's take a look at the GFS and see what it shows here. Let's make sure that we have the updated run. Oh yeah. It brings a lot more precipitation here. Even double-digit precipitation there in gray, possibly even approaching a foot there in southwestern Louisiana. Look at that rainfall coming in, folks. Quite a ripper of a slug of rain. And it's also going to be moving inland too, up toward Memphis, eastern Arkansas. To get quite a bit of precipitation up there near the Memphis area. Boy, it picks up on that upper level low, just racking eastern Georgia, eastern South Carolina. Getting hammered by big time precipitation down there as well. I took the Bears. I didn't like any of the games here in the NFL, at least in the 1 o'clock version, so I ended up taking the Bears. I do believe in Caleb Williams as an OU fan, even though I know it kind of went weird with Lincoln Riley and everything too up there. But this is the precipitation on the GFS, which is definitely the strongest hurricane signal that we've seen yet so far. So far, the hurricane models aren't really following suit just yet, but we'll just have to monitor this over the coming days. I do want to see the latest GFS ensemble, but it's not available yet. We're still looking. Oh, it's starting to come out actually. So let's see how quickly this intensifies down in the Western Gulf. When you look at the ensembles here, you can actually look at the individual members of the ensemble and the central pressures. Oh, man, we are plenty far out here. So there you go. Wednesday morning, the GFS is clustering around a tropical cyclone center just to the east of Brownsville. And you can see some of these individual members, 989 there, 999, 998, 996. The operational GFS is definitely on the low end of this envelope here. But you're looking at the GFS ensemble, individual central pressures of each member of the GFS. That's Wednesday morning. That's Wednesday midday, and you can definitely see a spread in timing. Some of these are going a little bit faster, but you can also see some of those that struggle to really find that low-level center are getting left behind a little bit by that trough. Probably just differences in the trough strength as well. Oh boy, look at the ensemble members really intensify this, especially as it resumes that northeastward turn, and then in a storm relative sense, the upper level winds aren't as strong, and it really starts to feel that ventilation. So it looks like this intensification on approach to southern Louisiana is supported by ensemble members. You're actually looking at the 12Z GFS ensemble here. .996, but the members still don't bomb it out like the GFS operational does. That's Wednesday night, so it is pretty consistent on the timing of a Wednesday night into Thursday morning landfall. But remember, the hurricane models are still showing this thing not organizing as rapidly as the GFS and really struggling even over the next couple of days of finding a consolidated center as it lifts up through the western Gulf of Mexico. Now we are here in Team Dominator headquarters. You can see the Chase Like a Champion Today poster back behind me. Inspired a little bit by Notre Dame football, which I'm not necessarily a fan of, but huge fan. But they obviously lost in Northern Illinois yesterday, a meteorology school. Always got to pull for the meteorology schools at least. But there's your mean MSLP. So this is likely the average location of where this tropical cyclone is going to be Wednesday at 0Z, 7 p.m., just south of the Sabine River. One of the worst places ever for bugs. We stayed in an Airbnb there after Hurricane Laura and just got lit up by wave after wave of insects. A massive sow, a pig, huge pig, died in the front of the Airbnb, and we just had wave after wave of no-see-ums, cattle flies, mosquitoes. I started spraying Windex on my legs to try to keep the bugs from biting me. That was totally ineffective, and just ended up burning my skin a little bit, and in fact probably even attracted more bugs to the location. And eventually Mike Tyson and I left. We just abandoned ship, left the production crew there at that Airbnb down after Hurricane Laura. But that was a crazy experience down in the Sabine River. Some of the worst bugs that I've ever seen. Nearly lost our minds out there. We were watching our friend Fahad cook fajitas. It was like 110 degrees in the place. The air conditioning was out. We had to keep the windows open. Bugs were coming in and out of the house. Felt like an episode of Naked and Afraid. Except, of course, we weren't naked, but... But you could definitely see it in an ensemble sense from 6Z to 12Z. It's kind of come back a little bit in the intensification. So it's possible that's a unicorn model run. But I do want to show you really quick too the Pacific Ocean SST anomalies. This is what I did in grad school here at the University of Oklahoma for like 12 years. I actually went to OU 17 years continuously enrolled. So I was definitely there a lot. I was storm chasing a lot as well. But look at that warm blob in the North Pacific just south of the Aleutian Islands back toward Japan. I think that's the reason why we've had these active couple of seasons for tornadoes and a little bit lower hurricane seasons. And I think that that's going to persist into 2025. And that's why we're getting the tendency for that trough ridge pattern to develop too. Look at that warm blob just south of the Aleutians there. But you can also see La Nina begin to emerge in the tropical Pacific. Look at the warmth though from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up through the central Atlantic and the tropical Atlantic. You got warm SSTs out there. But a lot of that just means that there's a lot less clouds too over the Atlantic basin. High pressure is dominating out there. So I think a lot of times the anomalous sunshine can lead to some warmth. But that warm blob, the North Pacific Oscillation there just to the south of the Aleutians, that's why we're having these active tornado seasons. That's why I intercepted a tornado just like last week or a few weeks ago on August 27th or 28th up there, up in South Dakota, because of the tendency for a western U.S. trough and an eastern U.S. ridge. I mean, you got to be kidding me with that. A lot of times I received a lot of backlash for saying that the extratropical Pacific sea surface temperature anomaly patterns play a role in warm season severe weather. Everyone's like, oh, those are just driven by the weather. But you can see that they're driven internally because of the seasonal migration too. You get a lot less upwelling off Japan with a weaker jet, and that leads to the warmth that develops and it migrates into the central Pacific Ocean spring into summer. That leads to ridging in the central Pacific, an anomalously far south jet across North America during the warm season. That's why it's been such a moderate summer down here in the southern plains. Back in the late 90s into the early 2000s, they were pulling bodies out of the OU games for a heat stroke back then, and now it's very moderate out there. In fact, I even had to bring a jacket to the football game last night. But yeah, that GFS, this is the old GFS, but we'll update it so you can watch that ripper move northward. This is the new GFS 12Z, so Takes it up. It's like a 957. Pretty much Hurricane Laura coming up there. But boy, does it organize early. 993 south of Brownsville. This is by Tuesday midday. Well, it takes its time. This is by tomorrow evening. Still in the Bay of Campeche tomorrow evening. Monday Night Football. And it curves northeast with the arrival of that trough. Tries to go inland and then just sits and spins over the central U.S. That's going to bring a ton of rainfall in the central U.S., like Tennessee, into northern Mississippi, Kentucky, Missouri, Boot Heel. It's going to cause some big frickin' problems in there in terms of flooding. There it is, just headed right up the Mississippi River Delta. But that is still the operational GFS, which is a bit of an outlier in terms of how strong it's going to be. But this would bring flooding and tornado potential in these outer bands, as that would lift off to the northeast. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as well. Wow. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you so much for those donations. Thanks everybody. We're probably going to be activating live storm chase mode for this one. It looks like the algorithm may have picked up on my audio and then throttled us at like 1200 concurrents. Yeah, we're all nerds in here. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And it does look like we're probably going to have to head down there on Tuesday to chase this thing. There you can see the uptick in the probabilities from the National Hurricane Center. Western Gulf. Even though we're in the middle of kind of an inactive hurricane season, even record-breakingly so during the peak, it only takes one hurricane to cause major problems and for a season to be memorable. You may remember Hurricane Michael that happened in 2018. It only takes one. So thank you everybody for tuning in to this live emergency update on the potential for a Hurricane Francine to develop over the western Gulf of Mexico. Odds are increasing in the development of a tropical cyclone. Hurricane models show kind of a weak tropical storm headed up towards southern Louisiana. Operational GFS is a unicorn model, but shows like a major hurricane coming into south central Louisiana. And a lot of the other models kind of show category 1 to maybe a tropical storm coming in. It's interesting that the hurricane models have a very tilted tropical cyclone though. So it seems like it doesn't get quite as organized by the time that trough arrives. But if it is an organized tropical cyclone by the time that trough arrives, I think it'll benefit from the ventilation ahead of that upper trough as well. So thanks everybody for tuning in to this live emergency update. Remember those 3 most